This is the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. Hey everyone, a quick message from me, the founder of the Voice of Early Childhood. I wanted to thank you all for listening and tuning into the podcast. We're always ensuring we provide valuable content for our listeners and viewers as we share diverse voices from across the early childhood community. And we're always encouraging you all to share your voice too. So if you have a specific topic in mind or a guest you'd like to hear from, let us know. Just fill in the contact us form via the link in this episode description. And if you haven't already done so, please do subscribe to the podcast on whatever platform you are listening on. This helps us to keep sharing voices and thought-provoking content. Thank you all for being part of the Voice of Early Childhood community. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Voice of Early Childhood podcast. My name is Angelica Solinska. I'm your host. And today we're exploring a theme that sits at the very heart of relationships with children. So the power of language. We know words can lift us up or bring us down, but we truly need to consider the fact that words have a lasting impact on children, and that's what we're unpicking today. So our guest is Jessica Bondy, who is a passionate advocate and founder of Words Matter, which is a charity that is working on ending childhood verbal abuse and promoting and encouraging, empowering communication. So Jessica, thank you very, very much for joining us today. It's great to have you on.
Well, thank you very much, Angelica, for inviting me. And please do call me Jess. A lot of people do. Yes, I mean, it's a topic very close to my heart. And I think the key thing is our whole mission for Words Matter is about ending verbal abuse of children by adults. Because as children, we're so impacted by the words adults say to us. Because when you're a child, you believe everything that that a parent, that a carer, that a teacher says to you.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, because they are.
Must be true.
Yeah, because they are as the authority figure and someone you trust. Yeah, so I guess let's kind of begin by thinking about, you in your article, you encourage us to reflect on our own childhoods as well. So what led you to start Words Matter? Was there a particular kind of moment for yourself? Did you reflect on your childhood or other, childhoods?
My story began literally with a kind of eureka moment. So I spent years and years in communication doing PR and marketing, and I worked for all sorts of different companies and brands, everybody from British Airways to Samsung to Sky to Cadbury, Waitrose, FedEx, Procter and Gamble, Unilever brands, you name it. And I'd also always coached and mentored young people to help them realize their potential at kind of three key stages, one of which was to springboard into further education, if that's what they wanted to do, kind of A-level degree, if they wanted to then do that, or whether they wanted to launch themselves on the job market, because there's so little provided for young people about how to get a job when you graduate or when you don't decide to go to university, or to help them flourish where they were or somewhere else. So if you're in a job, navigating the politics, or if you decide to leave a job. And then a friend of mine said to me in Australia, said, I think it'd be really good if you joined us for this course. And it was all about women speaking up and finding their voice. And we'd meet on Zoom once a week, and every week we'd be given a different topic. And on the 5th of the 6th week, and there were probably about 7 or 8 of us on this Zoom course. And on the 5th of the 6th week, the penultimate week, the topic we were given by the person who was running the course was, if you're going to die in the next 6 months, what do you want your legacy to be?
Massive question.
It's a huge question. And actually one none of us ever ask ourselves that.
Yeah.
And so I sat at my desk where I am now, my apartment, and I got my pen, and, we were all given a bit of time to think of what we were going to say. And I made some notes. And in that moment, something came to me. So then it was my turn to stand up. And I looked down my laptop, as I am doing now, and I said, if I'm going to die in the next 6 months, I don't want my legacy to be that I'm a good aunt. I have a lot of nieces and nephews. Mm-hmm. And everybody would say, oh, you're such a good aunt. Anyway, and I didn't want my legacy being that I was a communication specialist, even though I'd been director and MD of firms and I'd run my own agency. I didn't want that to be my legacy. I didn't also want my legacy to be that I coach and mentor young people to help them realize their potential, even though all of those things were really worthwhile. In that moment, sitting at my desk, faced with if I had 6 months to live, I said this. I said, if I'm going to die in the next 6 months, I want to end verbal abuse of children by adults because words matter. And I said it because of my own lived experience and words getting so locked in my brain that are so negative. Because so many of the people I'd coached, young people, older people, my clients, I mean, I've worked with clients on communications in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, had all been so deeply impacted by the words they'd heard when they were growing up, and it made them often question what they were capable of doing. And there was one young girl who said to me, who I was coaching at the time, who said, if this is what my mother thinks about me, what's the point of me being alive? So having had this kind of, this literal epiphany, I then thought, actually, this is what I want to do with my life. And so I started reading all the research. And I think that one can know something anecdotally. You can think, I'm affected by it, lots of other people are affected. But when I read all the research, and I literally bought lots and lots of books and looked at lots and lots of research papers, everything I read was so incredibly compelling. So not only on the immediate impact of the words that adults say to children in terms of feelings of self-esteem and feelings of worthlessness and hopelessness, but the long-term impacts. These impacts don't fade, they last. And the research showed that it can lead to verbal abuse of children by adults, can lead to anxiety, depression, eating disorders, substance abuse, self-harm, and even suicide. So I just thought, gosh, and I kind of I decided I had to set up a charity. And nobody else seemed to be focused specifically on this issue. And what was so extraordinary is when I dug and I Google searched and I looked everywhere, I couldn't see any other organisation focusing on the kind of power of language, the power of communication for children, and the huge harm that verbal abuse can do to a child. And so I said, I'm going to set up a charity. I'm going to call it Words Matter. And our entire focus is on, like razor sharp, is about ending verbal abuse of children by adults. And I wrote to all these amazing experts whose kind of research I'd read, Harvard, you name it. And I sent them a little email. I mean, who am I? I'm in my little apartment writing an email and said that hoping to talk to you about your research in relation to what I'm doing. And this issue goes so unnoticed and unrecognised, yet it can cause such harm. And I'm setting up this charity, and we're going to do 3 things. We're going to research the scale and impact of this issue of childhood verbal abuse by adults. We're going to try and raise awareness, get this issue on the map, and do campaigns and provide resources and training. And we're going to also, it's really important that we collaborate with others, experts, decision makers, other organisations, and those with lived experience to help develop solutions, because this is a societal issue. If we're going to solve this, we have to work together, not do it alone. And what was so incredible to me is these people came back within 1 or 2 hours.
Oh, wow.
1 or 2 hours saying, yes, they'd be happy to speak. And if you think of any of us in our daily life, how many emails we all get, and especially kind of leading academics or researchers, they are literally inundated.
Yeah.
So it was so exciting. I remember the first email I got back was from this leading guy at Harvard who'd done a lot of work on verbal abuse in the brain. And then I spoke to him and I said what I was doing. And I said, I think I'm the first organisation to focus on this. And he goes, I think you are. And I said, oh, I'd really love you to be. Would you join my advisory board? And he said, yes, I will. And I'd liked it to be part of my legacy too, because I sort of told him my story. So I formed an advisory board and then I funded a lot of research because it's so important that everything we do is evidence-based.
Mm-hmm.
Started having loads and loads of conversations with all these different organizations, be it the World Health Organization or all the CEOs of the leading charities, be it NSPCC or Anna Freud or A Place to Be, people at Save the Children, UNICEF. And there seemed to be a growing level of support for what I was doing. And then we launched in September 2023 when we revealed the findings, the shocking findings. One of the many pieces of research we did was to try and look at the scale.
Mm-hmm.
And what is so shocking is that 2 in 5 children experience verbal abuse by adults. Mm-hmm. And of those 2 in 5, over half experience it weekly, and 1 in 10 every single day of their lives.
Oh, wow.
And it's not, there were no socioeconomical regional differences. It literally is, this issue is all pervasive.
Okay.
And who's doing it? Parents, carers, teachers, coaches. But there are there's a long tail of other people that are doing it. So it's a shopkeeper, bus conductor. And what's interesting is that a lot of it is when people are doing it unintentionally without realizing the impact. Mm-hmm. We're all about trying to support and empower adults to think about what they say and think about and learn, about the impact. A lot of people know about the impact of other forms of maltreatment, but they're not aware of the huge impact this can have until they start to think about it. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things we asked in a lot of our research groups, which is what you started your question with, is, we can all remember things said to us. And I'm sure you can remember adults that said things that made you feel great and others that didn't. And so often it's those adults that have said something that was hurtful or shaming or blaming or critical, that one has this kind of visceral memory of. I mean, I've had people in the past, since setting this up, we've talked about literally the colour of people's hair. They can still remember the smell in the room. They can remember exactly what the person was wearing.
I guess because it evoked so much emotion, isn't it? That's the point. It's not just you remember the words that people say. We talk about the fact that you remember how they make you feel. And that's why this is so powerful, isn't it? And you talk about in your article the fact that verbal abuse can be as significant as physical or sexual abuse, kind of what you just kind of mentioned there. And that seems like, it's really, it can be quite surprising to some people and shocking. And you also talk about the fact that actually verbal abuse is not always about necessarily shouting at a child. It's actually about like the tone of voice and the subtle criticism and sarcasm and things like that. That the things that we might just, as you said, we might not be wanting to cause any harm, or we're not even noticing that we are. I guess that's the most dangerous, when we don't even know that we're causing harm or potentially could cause harm.
Yes, and I think it's just being conscious of it. I mean, what was interesting is when we talked to children and we asked them, what were the top 5 most hurtful words? Mm-hmm. And they were, you're useless. You're stupid. You can't do anything right. You're worthless. And I'm ashamed of you.
And they really are horrible things to hear, aren't they?
Horrible things to hear. Horrible things to hear, but, they're horrible things to hear because it's like being labelled. And I think what happens is, it's almost like casting a spell when these things are said to you. And people, it's like you're never going to be good at sport. So a lot of people give up on sport, or you're lazy, or um, you're a baby, or in terms of also other things that were so painful for children was being compared to others. But on the flip side, we asked them what were the things that were made them feel good, what were the most helpful words, and these are things like "I'm proud of you" and "You can do it," "I believe in you," "I'm here for you," "It's okay to make mistakes, you can learn from them." And I think this whole thing of "it's okay to make mistakes, you can learn from them" is such an important phrase, because it's this whole thing of the kind of growth mindset.
Yeah.
Not yet. We've talked about the power of the word "yet." And for all of us in life that are striving for something, you want to have hope that you haven't got there yet.
Yeah, it is so powerful, isn't it? We've just had our conference this year, our annual conference, and we had a keynote, Matt Baller, and he was talking exactly about that, the power of the word "yet" and positive affirmations with children. And it really, you really think, actually, these are such wonderful things to hear. And if we're feeding children with this language at such an early age, then they are growing up to be these, people who have got that resilience being built up and, like you say, growth mindset. And that's what they're surrounded by. It's so much more kind of, loving, if anything, but it's just giving them that confidence in themselves. As you say, it's about the fact that it's okay if they make mistakes, or they can learn, and being out of that comfort zone. And it just brings so much, doesn't it?
And I think if one asks them, how did it make you feel hearing those words? When you hear the negative words, you feel anxious, doubting yourself, low in confidence, isolated, frightened. But when you hear those more helpful words, you feel good about yourself, you believe in yourself, you feel happier, you feel more confident. So it's look for the good, and we have kind of, I guess, 5 things that, if one remembers 5 simple things, actually probably 5 is too many for people to remember, but the number 1, adults are role models for children.
For sure.
If we respect children, they will not only respect themselves, they'll respect others. And if an adult's shouting all the time, you think that's kind of normal. So then you make yourself or criticize or whatever.
Because that's all you've seen, and you
That's all
begin
you've
to
seen,
think
and you think
that
that's
is,
normal.
yeah, and you might even think this is what a relationship looks like of any sort. This is how things are done. This is how we speak to each other. And that if you don't see anything else,
particularly in the early years, early childhood, those critical early years are when you're, is such an important time for brain development. And we know that hearing these negative words, the verbal abuse, can literally change the brain. One can look at MRI scans and see the impact it has. So let's do everything that we can to build the best brains of our future generation, because all children need safety and security and warm and encouraging words to build those positive foundations going forward. So I mentioned role modeling. The other thing that's important is about setting expectations that are realistic for the age and stage and for who they are as people. And this is what's, with neurodiversity, what the brain functions differently.
yeah,
If you're a 3-year-old, you've got your ability is very different to a 10-year-old or an adult. Being told to sit still, you're such a fidget, or you're so lazy, or all those sorts of things. One just doesn't have the concept of it. When one isn't of the brain development to kind of review, assess, that sort of thing. So set expectations that are realistic for the age and stage, because children want to do well. They want to do well. The other thing that's so important is about focusing on the positives. Look for the good. And also, we all like to have positive feedback. It's not to say that one doesn't say things for improvement and growth, but focus on the positives rather than always pointing out the negatives. And don't, as part of that, is not criticizing the person, but criticizing the actual behavior, which is really something to think about.
As I guess what you were talking about earlier, sorry, I was just going to say, actually, when we say harmful things to children, that some of the examples that you made, they are, when you kind of said those out loud, I was thinking, reflecting, they're actually talking about the child's like character and almost like identity, and kind of saying you are this and you are that.
You wear these things like a label around your neck.
Yeah.
It's like you almost become branded. People use the word naughty, stupid, all those really critical, and suddenly everybody feels that. You know what I mean? That's the label it becomes, and it sticks. And for adults, be it a parent or a carer or a teacher or coach, if you can, we all get overloaded sometimes. We can all be under stress and say things, but if you can just, in that moment, just kind of catch yourself and think, stop, breathe, and think before you speak.
You need that pause,
you just need that pause. Just stop. Because the other thing that our research showed when we talked to, over 1,000 parents and carers, is nobody feels good about after, when they've said something that, that they'll regret later, or they'll think they wish they could turn back the clock, or they feel anxious and worried themselves. So all those sorts of things. And then the last thing of the 5 is about repair. And I think it is never too late to put things right. And an apology is a start. And I've had countless conversations with people in there of all ages who've been affected by harsh words. And they just said, oh, if only he'd apologise. Even now, people in their 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, just longing for an apology that it shows that the person understands they've done wrong, and it also teaches empathy and shows you can make mistakes. And it's about repair, and you can kind of break the cycle. But what is hard is that, as you picked up on earlier, is if people have been in that environment and experienced it themselves, this is how history repeats itself, because they just haven't learned another way of doing it. And there's a great expression, which is hurt people hurt people.
It makes so much sense, doesn't it? Again, it's all you've seen, and sometimes it's really hard to change if that is all you've seen, and perhaps no one's challenged you, and if they do, you think maybe there's something wrong with them, or why are they picking this up with me now? Actually, I've always been this way, and I don't see anything wrong with that. So sometimes it's really hard to change, because it's just almost like in your nature now, because this is how you've just built up your almost like personality, so the way that you speak to people, because that's how you've been spoken to. So it makes sense that it's a cycle and it continues. And how would you say, is it possible to break that cycle sometimes if you're the one who's doing it as well?
It is 100% possible to break the cycle, absolutely, if people stop and think about it. And what has been so extraordinary is that so many of the people, we've developed a training course that was piloted and evaluated last year by University College London, and it does make people, because you're gaining an understanding of the impact and you're thinking about your own behaviour, it does make people reflect and change it. And I think there have been people who said, gosh, I can see, there was one guy who said, goodness, I can see, you're really making me think about that. My two sisters were criticised by by our father in their teenage years about their appearance and their carrying, having, as the father called it, you've got fat legs, or another sister was criticized about something else. And these sisters of his who are now in their 50s had been, had terrible eating disorders and still had eating disorders. And I think that you can break the cycle with more awareness, but it's actually thinking about it. And it can be, this whole subject can be very confronting. It can be confronting. And it's not about, this is about support and empowerment. And we can all make mistakes. We can all say things we later regret. And we all live busy, stressful lives. And children we interviewed and parents, carers, and other adults we've interviewed are all, they can see why it happens, stresses at home, financial pressures, work stresses, one's own personal stresses that are going on. It becomes, it's hard. It's just taking that, it's just thinking about it in the same way as other forms of maltreatment, because half of all mental health disorders start by the age of 14.
Oh, wow.
So it's so important that you can, those critical years of the child, to give them the best start in life, because we all want that. We all want that. I talk about, we all want our little chicks to be given everything to help them fly. And let's do it. Let's build them up, not knock them down.
Yeah, I love that. It is so important to build children up and really reflect on that. And I guess, when we were talking about moving on and trying to change yourself, and you say it is possible to change this cycle, to break this cycle, I guess it is really all about education. Like you said, when you understand the impact of your words, then you begin to pause and think, oh, wow, this is really how my language is impacting young children and what it's doing to them, and right now and in the future. And it is about that awareness, and then that's where that reflection comes. And I guess it's so important to be able to potentially, I think, reflect in a kind of shared way with other people around you, because it can often turn into shame. Really difficult to deal with. And then how do you move on from that? Then you're in that place where you're stuck, with that shame and that guilt.
Yes, I think it's realizing. I think it's realizing that you can break the cycle, and an apology is a start. And we can all say things we later regret. And I think that it's just say something kind and nice. Try and be positive. Try and look for the good. Look for the good. And think about how you want to be spoken to.
Yeah, it's such a simple thing, isn't it? We talk to children about that, but a lot of the time we need to reflect as adults, as like you say, as busy adults with our busy lives. A lot of the time it is very much kind of going back to that principle of you can't look after others if you don't look after yourself. So it's kind of reflecting back in on ourselves and thinking, why am I saying these things? Why am I being like this? And what's happening? Is this the norm for me? Or maybe I am just stressed. And then thinking, how do I almost like support myself to support others? How do I support myself to be better for others? It's just all about that internal reflection, isn't it?
But I think also sometimes, if you're a parent or an adult or a teacher, and other people spoke to you in that way, something that you remember being told by your parents or your teachers about something in a negative way, then seeing that in a child triggers that and you react in the same way. That's why you just need to
That's a
think
good
about
point.
it. And that's why often things get repeated, because you're unconsciously, you're remembering what happened to you in that moment too. And that's why you're using it again. And other people, that there are this whole myth about sticks and stones, and this other, a lot of the expression, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and there are examples of people who've had awful times and have done really well, but they're in the minority. I mean, I consider myself incredibly fortunate because I had had a really successful career, and I've been very lucky. But there are other people who've literally been kind of hampered by the branding, the words they've heard all their lives. All their lives, they carry these feelings of worthlessness or hopelessness, or I'm never going to be good enough, or I'm never going to have the chance of doing X, Y, and Z. And it's just trying to stop that and just give people hope. And I think as adults and as children, we all want to be seen and heard for who we are. We all want to be seen for who we are. We've all got our own unique skills and ability. Let's see people for who they really are.
And I guess that's the difficulty, isn't it? When you're given that label, then that's when you're not given the chance to be the person that you know you are or want to be inside. You're just being labeled for potentially, as we said, one mistake that you might have made, and then that's who you're seen as and almost who you become. And I do really see this affecting, as you said, if it affects you, if some people affect you forever, but it can seem as like, oh, are they almost like giving in and giving up? But actually it can be seen in quotations, the strongest of people, when actually they are kind of, let's say again in quotations, doing well in their life, and they are working through challenges and have success in their lives, whatever that means to them. But sometimes there are certain points and phrases or in instances, like you say, that might trigger that memory. And I've definitely kind of found that in myself, if somebody has said something to me, and maybe it wasn't even an unkind, it was maybe a situation where it was something that was a really loving thing, but then it sparks something in your brain and you remember how you were treated as a child, or something that someone said to you that was completely different to this situation. And that's sometimes when that hurt can kind of open up, and then you think, oh my gosh, for all these years I've been kind of fine, but now this has just suddenly opened up this hole. I guess it's, all those emotions have been buried for all those years.
Absolutely. And I think negative words are just so powerful. And part of it is, as humans, it's all about self-protection. And so when you hear negative words, the brain literally kind of hooks onto them and spends longer time processing and keeping them alive in our brain, in a place that's readily accessible in our brain, because it's part of our fight or flight mechanism. It's for protection. And so that's why as humans we lock into these things. And so that's why they last so much. They literally take root. And as children, when you're a child, you're particularly in the early years and until later in adolescence, there's concrete thinking. What, as I said at the beginning, what people say, an adult says about you, you believe to be true. You believe to be true.
Yeah, and that is so impactful.
It's only when you know that's why the adolescent years are another key part of brain development, because then you're starting to develop kind of logical thinking and reflection, and
Mm,
you can weigh you can start weighing things up. Is this right? Is this not right? But one's not at that stage yet.
mm.
You
And
know,
sometimes, like you say, you get so deep rooted that even if you are at that stage, that's what you've been told to believe about yourself, and then it continues into adulthood.
yes, I mean, I remember teachers saying awful things.
Mm,
You're never going to amount to anything more than a petrol pump attendant. Oh, I mean, or you're never going to be good at this, or other adults saying other things, and it's hard when you've got those labels.
yeah, and then that's labeling everyone else around you as well with those
And
kind
you
of
need
remarks
somebody to
too.
recognize, in a way, we all need that one or two people to really help build us up.
Mm,
And that's what we all need in life. And um, I'm sure you can remember who really supported you in your life, or
mm,
made you feel good about yourself and as a child, and it's just so important in terms of
mm,
people's confidence, building resilience, building empathy.
mm. And that's so important early on in life so that you're able to then internalize those positives. Because I feel like a lot of the time, if you're told so many negatives about yourself, then when you're told something positive, you don't believe it, or you find it really hard to trust because
Absolutely.
you've been told the opposite your whole life.
Yes, absolutely.
Mm,
Absolutely.
mm. Well, I just kind of wanted to touch on quickly the neurodivergence aspect you talked about, and that kind of reminded me what we say a lot of the time in early years, and we always talk about the unique child. So I really like that you mentioned the kind of the stage of development of the child and not necessarily the age as well. And it's just so vital to be able to understand each individual and what their needs are. If they might be, like you mentioned, like 3 years old or a 10-year old, actually it doesn't always matter. It's just about their own stage of development and their needs. And if they're, especially with neurodivergence, being labeled as naughty or distracted and fidgety and annoying or all these things, actually it's about the child doing what's right for them. And it's
Absolutely.
recognizing that.
Absolutely recognize that. We've got a lot of really brilliant resources prepared by this woman, Dr.
Mm-hmm.
Pinar, and then how to talk to children,
Mm-hmm.
to help build them up. And there's one, I formed a little group of neurodivergent experts, some
Mm-hmm.
leading people, and it's how to talk to neurodivergent children and young people.
Mm-hmm.
It's under our resources. If anybody is interested, you just go into our website, wordsmatter.org, and there's find help, and there's some really helpful, simple resources.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is how to talk to neurodivergent children and young people.
Mm-hmm.
It, it's just giving kind of reflective thoughts, but also explaining why brains function slightly differently and being tolerant of that. And um, I'm really pleased that there's greater awareness of neurodivergency now, because
Yeah.
um, that is how that's how their brains function. It's not, they're not going to compute in the same way as other
Mm-hmm.
people, and it's not helpful to. It's just awful when you see people being criticized or blamed or shamed or all of those things. And just picking up on something else you said earlier, which is it's not just about shouting. Verbal abuse is not
Mm.
just about shouting and screaming. It can be very subtle. And often the words are said in a low tone or with a certain look, and
Mm-hmm.
they can really cut through and be
Mm.
terrifying.
Mm. Yeah, it's just so important to reflect. Well, Jessica, Jess, as you said, thank you so much for sharing your insight of, and the important work that you do. It's really vital for people to, as we've been talking about in this whole episode, to reflect on the words that they use with children, as words matter. And your message is really important, that when we use words to build children up, we lay those foundations for a future rooted in confidence and trust and emotional well-being. So I guess I'd like to say to our listeners, perhaps some reflective questions for you to take away are: how do you speak to the children in your life? What words do you remember hearing as a child? And what words do you want children to carry with them into their future? So again, for everyone listening and watching, Jessica's article can be found on the Voice of Early Childhood website. The link is in this episode description, and we'll also add a link to the article on the resources that Jess mentioned. I keep calling you Jessica because what I've got in my notes, and then you said, actually, call me Jess.
Please call me Jess. And I think the other thing, Angelica, is if people want to join our mission, the more people that can join our mission, the better. They just need to write to us at hello@wordsmatter.org and join the conversation.
Yes, I love that. We always say that here on the Voice of Early Childhood as well. Join the conversation, keep the conversations going, and there's so much power in collaboration. As I mentioned, one of the other people that really works a lot on this is Matt Baller. He's got an article and a podcast episode out with us on growth mindset in early childhood, and also proactively promoting positive mental health, which I'll also pop in the episode description for everyone who's listening. And another thing, actually, Cheryl Warren's article and episode on reaction versus response. That's something that, as you were talking, Jess, as well, I kind of thought about, when you were talking about that pause. And that's what kind of was thinking, instead of just suddenly reacting, actually pause, like you said, think, breathe, and respond.
Stop, breathe, think, speak.
Thank you very much, Jess. It's been brilliant to have you on, sharing your amazing work. And I'm sure that we'll hear from you again.
Wonderful. Thank you.